The content of this podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended as, nor should it be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. Hello, you are listening to Itchy and Bitchy, a podcast that provides answers to your many health questions. I am Karen Nickel, family nurse practitioner, and I'm going to talk to you about endometriosis today. And I know that probably many of you are thinking, well, I don't have endometriosis, so why do I need to listen to this podcast? But you probably know someone who does have endometriosis or who is struggling with some of the signs or symptoms of endometriosis if you are not having those problems. And this might be helpful to you to help your friend or family member who is suffering from this problem. And I want to say that I have a brand new microphone today, and I am super, super excited about it and hope that it was worth the money. So anyway, I want to talk about this endometriosis and what it is. So we still don't know all the factors that cause endometriosis, but it happens when cells that line the uterus, meaning the cells that make up the period blood, travel out to the abdominal cavity and attach to other tissues like the bladder, fallopian tubes, ovaries, colon, and kidneys. And when that happens, every time the period comes, those endometriosis lesions that are attached to the other tissues in the abdomen cause inflammation and scarring, which leads to painful periods, pain with intercourse, infertility. I often see people with the symptom of pain in the rectum with bowel movements. That's a really common problem, especially they'll notice the pain. All these symptoms they'll tend to notice more during the period. In some women, the lesions can be dormant and therefore they do not cause symptoms. But if inflammation is added to the equation, the lesions become active and cause symptoms. Endometriosis affects about 10% of women in the U.S., and that's a lot of women, but even more prevalent in women who have the symptom of pelvic pain. In those women, 70% of them will have endometriosis. So women who have endometriosis typically present with pelvic pain, and 70% of women with pelvic pain have endometriosis. So it's a pretty prevalent problem. That was too many P's. Let me just say that. So what are the causes of endometriosis? As I mentioned earlier, we really don't know all the reasons that some women develop this problem, but we do know that it is both hormonal and autoimmune in nature. Unfortunately, traditional medicine doesn't really look for the root causes of the problem. Rather, the process in traditional medicine is to identify the problem and then treat it with surgery or medications. We don't go back and say, why are we having this and how do we prevent it or how do we make it better? Those who practice functional medicine, and I've talked about functional medicine practice in previous episodes, but they do search for the underlying factors that set the stage for this problem to occur. So that's really the difference in functional medicine compared to traditional medicine, is always searching for that root cause so that lifestyle changes or whatever's needed can be added so that the problem can be prevented or treated. First of all, there are genetic and epigenetic components. There is no one gene that can be checked to determine the genetic driver in this. So you can't go to your provider and say, gee, I want to be checked for that endometriosis gene. We just don't have that. But we know that is more common in women who have a first-degree relative with endometriosis. So there clearly is a genetic predisposition. We just don't know the specific gene to check for that predisposition. And many of you have heard about genetics, but may be less familiar with the term epigenetics. As the Center for Disease Control and Prevention explains, our genes play an important role in your health, but so do your behaviors and environment, such as what you eat and how physically active you are. Epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. Unlike genetic changes, epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change your DNA sequence, but they can change how your body reads a DNA sequence. So, what is the epigenetic piece of the endometriosis puzzle? Well, apparently the intrauterine environment when a baby was developing in the uterus can influence future risk for endometriosis. In other words, exposure of chemicals and plastics while pregnant can cause problems because they are xenoestrogens, meaning they act like estrogens in the body and cause the hormonal imbalance that can set this disease in motion. So if your mother was exposed to chemicals and plastics while you were in utero, it predisposes you to developing some of these inflammatory or autoimmune disorders, including endometriosis. But there is a reason for some hope, because our gene expression can be affected by our environment. The hope is that this provides us knowing that the DNA does not provide the final word. Since our environment can cause a gene expression to switch on or off, we have some control over our genetic predispositions. So how we live our lives gives us the ability to reprogram our DNA in a way. So there is hope. There is hope and there are answers. And I'm going to talk to you about how we evaluate endometriosis right after this quick break. I frequently talk to you about the importance of eating a healthy diet. As a matter of fact, we are talking about that very thing on today's episode. I find that a lot of people don't really know what it means to follow a healthy diet. Green Chef can guide you because they have a meal plan for every healthy lifestyle: keto, paleo, plant-powered diets, or even if you just want to have delicious but balanced dishes. Green Chef offers 35 nutritious and super flavorful options to choose from every week. I have many patients who want to transition to a plant-based diet, and with Green Chef, you can take homemade plant-based meals to the next level with Green Chef's plant-powered options. All of you carb-conscious people out there can take advantage of their keto and paleo options, which will give you the premium proteins and vital veggies you need to power through your day. Green Chef is the first USDA-certified organic meal kit, so you can enjoy hand-picked organic veggies and premium proteins without having to worry about where they are coming from. And my listeners will know that it is important to me that Green Chef is the most sustainable meal kit, offsetting 100% of their plastic use and 100% of their carbon footprint and emissions, so you can enjoy your greens while being green. Pineapple teriyaki salmon with broccoli, red bell pepper, pineapple, roasted cashews, carrots, onions, and ginger is on the menu this week at our home. This recipe is packed with the foods that are needed to help maintain optimal health. Go to greenchef.com/itchy10 and use code itchy10 to get 10 free meals, including free shipping. Go to greenchef.com/itchy10 and use code itchy10 to get 10 free meals, including free shipping. Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. So, how do we test for endometriosis? Well, first of all, endometriosis is a very difficult disease to diagnose because it is not seen on ultrasound or a CT scan or MRI. The only time we may get a glimpse of endometriosis on imaging is if one of these tests reveals a hemorrhagic cyst. This is also known as a chocolate cyst on the ovary. This is a cyst that, instead of being filled with clear fluid, is filled with blood. This is a finding that is consistent with the presence of endometriosis. So if a hemorrhagic cyst on the ovary is present, it is very likely that there are endometrial lesions on other tissues in the abdominal cavity. However, it isn't real common for us to catch that piece of information on imaging. So many women have symptoms for years before the diagnosis is made. The traditional medicine approach for testing is to perform an exploratory laparoscopic procedure to visualize the abdominal cavity for the presence of endometrial lesions. So since we can't get the information via imaging, we have to literally visualize the abdominal cavity with a laparoscopic surgery. So, and a lot of our diagnosis can come from the symptom history, and that really points us in the direction of endometriosis in making that diagnosis. So that is why we start by getting an in-depth family and personal history to determine how much chemical exposure they have that can disrupt the endocrine system and what their symptom history is, and when they have symptoms, how long they have symptoms, are they cyclically related. Hormonal testing also gives us a piece of information, and there are two important pieces to evaluate: estrogen metabolism and evaluation for estrogen dominance. So when we're evaluating for estrogen metabolism, we are looking at two estrogens. One of our estrogens, estradiol, is secreted from the ovaries. And the other one that we're evaluating is estrone, which is made from fat tissue. These two estrogens are metabolized by adding a hydroxy arm or an OH arm. And we end up with a 2-hydroxy or a 4-hydroxy or a 16-hydroxy estrogen. Each one has different impacts on the body. The 4-OH estrogen or 4-hydroxy estrogen are the potentially damaged estrogens to DNA. They tend to be much more reactive, and they have a much more damaging tissue response. Some of this is genetic in nature, but again, lifestyle changes can mediate this metabolism process. After the hydroxy arm is added to the estrogen, our body can add other arms to the molecule, like a methyl or a sulfate arm, that sort of packages up the estrogen molecule in a way that makes it less harmful. I know this is a lot of chemistry, so take a deep breath. So we put a hydroxy arm onto the estrogen, and some of those are more dangerous than others, and then we package it up by attaching it to yet another arm, including methyl arm or sulfate arm. And when we package it up like that, it makes it a less harmful estrogen. If your body is not able to package the estrogen molecule in that way, then the hydroxy estrogen molecule remains reactive and can cause inflammatory tissue changes. Are you all still with me? These changes can not only cause endometriosis, but they can play a key role in causing breast cancer, uterine cancer, cervical cancer, and ovarian cancer. So getting them packaged up is pretty darn important. There are laboratories like Meridian Valley Lab that offer either 24-hour urine or dried urine hormone testing that includes testing of hormone metabolites. These have to be ordered by a licensed medical provider, but the other testing available on their website, including food sensitivity testing, does not require a medical provider order. So, how do lifestyle factors influence this enzymatic process that we've been talking about? The enzyme needed to do the packaging can only function well with the presence of healthy levels of B vitamins and magnesium. B vitamins and magnesium. So, your diet can significantly influence, in a positive or negative way, how you metabolize estrogens. Estrogen dominance, as we've talked about before many times on this podcast, is a common problem, and correcting this can also help prevent or treat endometriosis. Many people in the U.S. not only have a poor diet, they have other contributing factors. For instance, if you have a slow methylation enzyme process, like we just talked about, a poor diet, and stress, you are definitely set up to have the presence of these reactive estrogens in your body. In addition to looking at estrogen metabolism, it's really important to look and address estrogen dominance. I've talked about this many times on previous episodes, and the U.S. diet tends to be high in sugar, starch, and alcohol, and low in fiber. We also eat meats and milk that have been treated with hormones. And in addition to our poor diet, we have increased stress and don't tend to manage that stress well. Exposure to chemicals and plastics is also common. All of these factors can lead to an estrogen dominant state. I have a young patient in her 30s who I see yearly for her annual GYN evaluation, and she has regular monthly periods without much PMS, cramping, or heavy menstrual flow. And over the years, she has mentioned intermittent low back pain that she attributed to horseback riding, which she does on a regular basis. She said that in the past, when she's had this back pain, that it has responded well to yoga and stretching. At her most recent annual exam, which was just a few weeks ago, she reported an increase in frequency and duration of the back pain, and that it wasn't resolving as nicely with her usual remedies. After taking a thorough history, it became clear that her symptoms were cyclic in nature and were consistent with potential endometriosis. I did a hormone evaluation and found her progesterone to be low and estradiol to be high for the phase of her cycle. I prescribed bioidentical progesterone and over-the-counter DIM, or diendomethyl, which can help clear extra estrogen from your body. I had a follow-up with her this week, and she was taking the progesterone as directed, but never started the DIM. She reported that her symptoms were 80 to 90% improved on the progesterone alone. She was surprised and amazed at the improvement. To address her remaining symptoms, I increased the progesterone dose and reminded her to start the DIM as previously directed. Many times women will assume that low back pain is a musculoskeletal problem, which will lead to a delayed diagnosis of endometriosis, especially in someone like her who really had no significant period symptoms, but had this chronic low back pain. Diagnosing and addressing her estrogen dominance provided significant symptom relief. Another thing we evaluate is our gut health. Checking the status of the gut microbiome and the health of the gut lining is so important. We have talked about leaky gut, what it is and how we treat it on this podcast before, and addressing leaky gut is an important factor in dealing with this endometriosis process. It is interesting that an increase in toxins secreted by the bad gut bacteria is seen in menstrual fluid of women with endometriosis. I'm going to say that again. Toxins that are secreted by bad gut bacteria are found in the menstrual fluid of women who have endometriosis. These toxins cause inflammation in the gut, and so if present in the menstrual fluid, it causes inflammation in the uterus as well. This finding confirms that there is a strong connection between a healthy or not so healthy gut and a healthy or not so healthy uterus. One of the other things that we look at are inflammatory markers when we're evaluating endometriosis, and we always check things like CRP and sed rate in the blood, and those are pretty common inflammation markers that probably most of you are aware of. One of the newer measurements that can be evaluated is something called galectin-3, and it can provide some useful information for treatment of this problem. Galectin-3 fuels cellular growth, inflammation, and scarring that is implicated in many fibrotic processes like lung fibrosis, endometriosis, and heart failure. Something called modified citrus pectin, or MCP, blocks galectin-3. So this food supplement may help reduce this inflammatory process. The difference between natural pectin and modified citrus pectin, or MCP, is that natural pectin is a sugary carbohydrate found in ripe fruits. Modified pectin is a powder you buy at the pharmacy. You are not going to find MCP in foods. You can buy MCP as a powder at health food markets, stores that sell supplements, and online. And please read the package directions for the dosing. Most suggest dissolving powdered MCP in liquid and drinking it on an empty stomach. It is also available in capsule form. There are several reliable companies who produce MCP, like Now Brand Foods and Vital Nutrients. Another thing we check for is gluten disorders. Gluten sensitivity or celiac disease can cause dysfunction of the gut lining, which plays a role in endometriosis. I think we just proved that. A 2012 study showed that eating gluten-free diet has reduced symptoms in women with endometriosis. Not a big surprise, because we know that removing gluten from the diet, if you have gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, significantly reduces inflammation. Those who have autoimmune disorders are at much higher risk for having gluten sensitivity. So keep that in mind. If you know you have an autoimmune disorder and you have endometriosis symptoms, gluten may be playing a part in that. In terms of treatment, traditional treatments include having laparoscopic surgery to ablate or burn the lesions that are present in the abdominal cavity, or give hormonal therapy that literally shuts down the body's own female hormones, and basically it puts the woman into a menopausal state. So it shuts down the hormones so that it doesn't stimulate the endometrial lesions, but it puts you in menopause. And so people have hot flashes and night sweats and, all the things that we don't really like about menopause. And for really severe endometriosis, the recommendation is to have a hysterectomy. So by taking out the uterus, the source of the endometrial cells is eliminated. So all these treatments are invasive and cause quite a few symptoms, like the hormonal treatment. The good news is that using a functional medicine approach, endometriosis can be addressed using diet and exercise changes and hormone balancing measures, eating foods high in B vitamins and magnesium, healing the gut, addressing estrogen dominance, and implementing stress reduction techniques will reduce the inflammatory process and correct or prevent endometriosis. So there are answers for you that require some lifestyle changes, but may prevent some pretty invasive procedures or treatments. Please visit our Facebook page, IMB Podcast, where you can leave more comments or questions. And our website is itchyandbitchy.com. Many thanks to Green Chef for sponsoring today's episode. As always, thanks to Forrest Wenzel, our producer and composer of our theme music. He has released an album called An Awful Lot, and make sure you go to wherever you stream your favorite music to listen. If you don't know where to stream music, you can find the album on Apple Music or Spotify. And as always, remember that your health is in your hands. Have a good week. Oh, how I feel. Itchy, bitchy, itchy, bitchy, itchy, bitchy, itchy and bitchy.